Planning out and building an empire that can stand the test of time is one of the most exciting aspects of a game of Civilization. My name, of course, is VanBradley, and by the end of this video, you are going to have all the information you need to be a city and empire building master. Once we go over all of these city building mechanics available in Civilization 7, I'm going to throw a few tips and tricks at the end of the video about how I've liked to build my cities so far. Like most things in a game as complicated as Civilization 7, there is no exact science for how to do this correctly. What I'd like you to do is have all the information you need to go and build the bespoke empire of your dreams. In Civilization 7, all of your population centers are called settlements. Settlements can either be in the form of a city like the sprawling metropolis of Tokyo. This is of course what you are used to seeing and playing in the average game of Civilization. However, brand new for Civilization 7, your settlements can also be towns. Capua and Puteoli are great examples of towns that are contributing and producing a lot for our empire without being cities. The cities in your empire like Tokyo here are able to produce things for your empire using their production in the production queue or using gold in the purchase queue. Cities have access to buildings of all types as well as the ability to build world wonders. Towns like Capua are designed to support the robust cities you'll be building in your empire like Tokyo. Towns can only create infrastructure with gold and have access to certain specializations that focus on one aspect of their development. With a few notable exceptions like the temple here in the exploration age or the port in the modern age, towns also only have access to ageless warehouse buildings. The unit you spawn into a game of Civilization 7 with is called a founder, and that founder is the only unit that will settle a city. Now that I've used my founder, you will see that Roma is a city. It can both produce and purchase. Every settler unit I build and use from here will start by creating a town. If you would ever like to convert one of your towns to a city, you can do so by clicking on the town, going to the bottom of the left-hand menu where it says Convert to City, and paying the required gold amount on the right. Using this Convert to City button and paying the gold cost is typically the only way to turn a town into a city. Any cities you acquire through warfare will be converted back to towns and need to be re-upgraded to a city, as well as most of your cities will transition back to towns during the age transition, and you will need to go back and convert it to a city again. Both cities like Bach and towns like Khan use their accumulated food yields to grow. If you click on a city or a town, you will see the food yields you are accumulating per turn on the left-hand side here. If you click on the city or town details screen right here, it will tell you how many more turns you need of accumulating food before you will acquire a new citizen. Cities will always use their accumulated food to grow themselves. Every time you reach a new citizen, the amount of food you need for the next one will be higher. In towns, though, you have the option of using the accumulated food to grow the town. You also have the option of sending that food to a bigger city to help it grow more quickly. When you settle a town, it will always have the growing town focus, which increases the town's growth by 50%. When a town is in the growing town focus, that means it is using its own food to accumulate for itself so the town can grow. A town here like Guangzhou will always be in the growing town focus until it hits 7 population. Seeing as Guangzhou only has 6 population, you'll notice if I try and switch it from a growing town, it simply gives me no option. Once your town hits 7 population though, if you click, you will see a variety of options depending on which age you're in. I'm going to call these town specializations. Specializations are designed to focus on one aspect of your town and really dial that aspect in and make it as good as it can possibly be. If you have a town with 7 or more population and you've chosen a specialization, like we've chosen Fishing Town here in Uxmal, you will only be able to choose between your chosen specialization and going back to a growing town. This means you have to choose your specialization carefully because you won't get the options back until the next age when all towns reset to growing towns, and you can choose the same in some cases or new in some cases specialization. At all points, regardless of what you do, any production accumulated in a town like this 26 production in Uxmal is converted into gold for your empire since the town cannot produce anything on its own. The gold, science, culture, and influence that are accrued in a town per turn are simply added to the yields at the top of the screen here and counted as an empire yield. So the gold just goes into your gold stash, the science just gets applied to the science per turn, etc. If your happiness in a town is above 0, any excess happiness is kind of added to your empire-wide happiness, and that will count towards celebration. Food is where things get very different though, and where your towns can really pump up the cities in your empire. Like I mentioned earlier, if your town has the growing town focus, it will use its food to grow itself. Once your town has a focus or a specialization, though, it does not matter which specialization it is. It could be fishing town, mining town, etc. Once your town is specializing, it will send all of its food to connected cities. This means that it will no longer grow itself as all its food has been sent to a city. If there are multiple connected cities, it will send them to all connected cities equally. This will enable your cities to grow far past what they could achieve on their own. Because the amount of food required to grow a new population scales pretty heavily, at some point for your cities to be able to grow consistently, you will need to have towns supporting them with food. If you click on the city details panel in a city, you can see which towns they are collecting food from. This city here of Bach is collecting 26 food per turn from Uxmal and 4 food per turn from Koba. You can see, though, without the town sending food to Bach, it would only be gaining 37 on its own instead of 67 with the support of nearby towns. Similarly, if you go to a town that has a specialization active and you click on the town details panel, it will tell you which cities it is sending its food to. In this case, it's gaining 52, but sending it equally between Bach and Sparta because they are both connected. Now that we've covered the very basics of towns and cities, it is time to move on to city and town growth. For the purposes of this demonstration, I am using a user interface mod that changes the details of what shows up on the tooltip so I can better explain the core concepts of city building to you. So if you get into your civilization games and your tooltips look different when you hover over a tile or a city, that is the reason. When a town or a city like Roma here accumulates enough food to acquire a new citizen, you will go through what is called a growth event. At the bottom right of the screen, it will prompt you to grow your city and your town, so all you have to do to start is click a button. The growth event allows you to take that new citizen and put it on a tile within your borders to start working something for that settlement. Placing the new citizen on one of these tiles is going to accomplish a few things for us. Firstly, it's going to place a tile improvement on the tile in question. In this case, it would be a woodcutter on these trees here, a woodcutter on these trees here, or a fishing boat on one of these 4 tiles here. If you were to put the citizen on the jade, though, it might be a mine. If you were to put it on the Kowlin, it might be a quarry, but just know in our case right now we have woodcutters and fishing boats. Placing a tile improvement on a tile will accrue the yields from that tile for the settlement. If we were to place this woodcutter right here, we'd gain 1 food and 1 happiness to the settlement. If we were to place this fishing boat here, we would gain 1 food, 1 gold, and 1 happiness for the settlement. Placing this population here does not increase the yields of the tile, it simply activates them for your settlement. Placing down a tile improvement also expands the borders of your settlement, which can be pretty important. If I were to place this woodcutter here, I would expand 1, 2, 3 tiles out to the west. If I were to place this fishing boat here, I would expand 1, 2, 3 tiles to the east. Same with the north, same with the south. Choosing which direction you want your settlements to expand in can be very important. If you want to collect this jade, or collect this Kowlin, or collect this fish, it would change which tile improvements you might put down depending on where you want to expand your borders. The maximum distance your city can grow is 1, 2, 3 tiles in any direction, so we still have lots of room to grow. As long as there is that room to grow, let's place this woodcutter down here, and boom, we've unlocked these 1, 2, 3 tiles, and now have access to 3 more tiles the next time we have a growth event. You can see now that the culture and happiness yields have increased in size and all of the yields of the surrounding tiles are smaller. That means we are accruing these yields because we've placed a tile improvement on top of it, and we're not accruing these yields because we haven't. You can see here in our resource screen, we currently have 0 resources. If you place a tile improvement on a resource, like this quarry on the jade, it will do all of the normal things of placing a tile improvement. We'll put down the quarry, we'll get the food, the culture, and the happiness. These yields will become bigger, our borders will expand, but now we will also get the jade in our empire. There are a variety of resources and a variety of types and different ways to use them. That's for a different video, but acquiring resources in your settlements is done by placing a tile improvement on top of them, like we just showcased. It doesn't come up too often, but just for terminology's sake, it's good to know that these tile improvements are classified as rural tile improvements. Later on, we're going to talk about urban tiles and urban population, but just know for right now, each tile improvement is classified as rural. And if we take a look at our population with the user interface mod, you will see we have 2 rural population. One of them is in here and one of them is in here. Those are the 2 we've added to our settlement recently. So if the game ever makes reference to rural tile improvements or rural population, that is kind of how we're calculating this. Growth works the exact same way in towns. You'll see we are able to grow the town of Capua right now. We click the Grow Town button. We have the same options, the same types of things are going on. We can place a mine or a woodcutter or a farm. We can accrue the yields. If we place it on a resource, we will accrue that resource. So growth in towns and cities at this stage is vaguely the same. Growth events in cities like Roma, though, eventually becomes more complicated and way more fun. But before we can talk about that, we need to talk about buildings, wonders, and all of these city building mechanics in Civilization 7. Before we get to putting these buildings on the map and going over how that works, there are a few different types of buildings you need to be aware of. Civilization 7 has simultaneously made this really easy and also really complicated, so bear with me. The first and easiest to understand style of building in Civilization 7 is the ageless building, like this brickyard right here. The most common ageless buildings are warehouse buildings like the stonecutter, fishing key, and brickyard here, or unique buildings to your civilization like the Basilica or the Temple of Jupiter on this flat grassland tile. An ageless building is exactly as advertised. Any building marked ageless, once placed on a tile, will stay on that tile and continue to give its effect for the entirety of the game over all 3 ages. It's important to note that any ageless buildings, like these 2 unique buildings on this tile or the granary here on this flat grassland tile, cannot be removed from their tiles once placed down because they are ageless. This means you have to be careful with where you place them because they will not be movable or destroyable later in the game. However, it also comes with the benefit of not depreciating in any way and giving you the benefit the entire game. For the purposes of city planning, built world wonders like the Colosseum here or the Oracle here are also ageless. They will give their effect the entire game. They will not depreciate. They are unremovable from the tile. They cannot be moved once they are built. I think I've covered most of the different things you will see the ageless tag on: warehouse buildings, unique buildings, and world wonders. However, just be on the look for the ageless tag because it means the same regardless of what it's attached to. The next styling a building can be tagged with is called obsolete, and it's basically the opposite of ageless. If we take a look at this flat tundra tile here, both the library and the barracks are tagged as obsolete. As you play through the game, you will encounter a lot of buildings like the library and barracks here, or the altar on this flat grassland tile here, that are great in the age in which they are unlocked and built, but depreciate over time as you go through the age transition. Let's take a look at one of our obsolete buildings, the library, in the Civilopedia. It says here the library is an Antiquity Age building. So in the Antiquity Age, it was giving us +2 science as a base. It had 2 codex slots, but it was also giving us additional science for each adjacent resource and science for each adjacent wonder. So it's not inconceivable that this library was giving us 4 or 5 science per turn instead of 2. The science and codex slots were coming at the cost of our maintenance, which was 2 gold every turn and 2 happiness every turn. Now that the building is obsolete, though, it is only giving us the +2 science. It is no longer gaining any adjacency bonuses, it is no longer giving us any codex slots, but it is still costing the full maintenance of 2 gold and 2 happiness per turn. I can't show you every building, but the Civilopedia will really help with this. The altar was another obsolete building we were just taking a look at. It is still going to provide its base 2 happiness, but it will no longer receive any of the additional benefits. It will no longer receive any of these adjacency bonuses, but it's still going to cost its full maintenance of 2 gold per turn. Unlike ageless buildings, though, which are permanently kind of super glued down to their tile for the rest of the game, our obsolete buildings can be overbuilt. If I go into Roma here, and I select the temple, it gives me a lot of options, which we'll talk about in a moment for where to build it, but one of the places I can build it was over top of the altar. We'll talk about how this works in a moment, but just know all of your obsolete buildings can be built over with new buildings that are more appropriate for the age you're in. While ageless and obsolete are kind of stylings or tags that are attached to a type of building when you play Civilization 7, let's talk about some of the types of buildings you might encounter. The first type of building you might encounter is what I'm going to call an age-specific building. Age-specific buildings like the dungeon and the bazaar here in the exploration age are those buildings that will grant their full effect and adjacencies in the age in which they are unlocked and built, but will eventually become obsolete in future ages. Age-specific buildings can be broken down into a few different categories: culture, science, gold, happiness, production, food, and military. You can see which category your age-specific building belongs in by hovering over it in the production menu here. You can see this bazaar is an exploration age building. It specifies it with the word exploration, but it's also a gold building. So if there's anything you find that boosts gold buildings, for instance, that'll be the bazaar. The dungeon again explicitly states it is an exploration age building. It is also a diplomacy and production building. So if you find anything that boosts diplomacy and production buildings, the dungeon will qualify for that. Almost all of these age-specific buildings are unlocked in the tech tree, and you can also find this information by hovering over them, so you know which buildings you might want to unlock. The observatory here again specifies it is an exploration age building, so it will become obsolete in the modern age. It is also a science building, so if you find anything that boosts science buildings, that is what the observatory qualifies as. The shipyard here is an example of what is qualified as a military building, whereas the kiln down here is an example of a culture building. With a few notable exceptions again, like the temple in the exploration age, all of these age-specific buildings, the ones that grant adjacencies, are only available to be built or purchased in cities. You'll see in Wat Cabnal, which is a city, I have the bazaar and the dungeon, kind of age-specific buildings available to build or purchase. But if I come to Patavium, though, which is a town, you'll see I don't really have any age-specific buildings. Certainly not the dungeon or the bazaar. Again, the temple is an exception, but a lot of those age-specific buildings are missing. Each age-specific building is going to have a base yield. So no matter where I put this armorer, you can see it says base yield for production. So it's always going to be worth at least 4 production, regardless of where I place it in my settlement. You'll see, though, that this one says it's going to be +5. That is because of its adjacency bonus. It's going to gain +1 production for each adjacent resource, or +1 production for each adjacent wonder, or both. So if I click on this armorer, and I go to this tile right here, you'll see it's adjacent to this wine, which is a resource. If I place it here, it's going to gain its 4 production just as a base, plus the 1 adjacency bonus from the wine. So if you're taking a look at these yields for these kind of age-specific buildings, and you're wondering why the number here is bigger than the base yield, it's because it's adding in the adjacency bonuses. Even if you don't know a lot about how to calculate adjacency bonuses yet, it's something you'll get better with over time. However, if you click the building, the game does do a good job of letting you know at least what you will get if you place it on the specified tile. For instance, if I place it on this tile, it'll say 4, this tile says 5. It's already accounting for the adjacency bonus on this screen when you place it down. Be on the lookout for different adjacency bonuses for different buildings. You'll see the armorer here, which is a military building, gives its adjacency bonuses for adjacent resources, whereas the bazaar here, which is a gold building, gives its adjacencies for navigable rivers, coastal terrain, and wonders. It's important to note that every age-specific building is going to give its adjacency for wonders. It'll give you +1 of its type. So this temple, which is a happiness building, will give +1 happiness for each adjacent wonder, whereas if we come back to Wat Cabnal, this bazaar, which is a gold building, will give +1 gold for each adjacent wonder. This makes wonders really powerful city building tools since they provide adjacency of their type to all age-specific buildings. You'll see this tile right here has an observatory, which is a science building, so it's gaining +1 science for being next to this world wonder. And finally, it's just good to know that all age-specific buildings have a maintenance cost. This bazaar costs -3 happiness per turn. You can see it at the bottom of the tooltip. Gold buildings will not cost gold as a maintenance. That would be weird. Happiness buildings will also not cost happiness as a maintenance. However, this military building here will cost both gold and happiness as a maintenance. So just be on the lookout for what you will be losing per turn for putting the building down. I've gone to a different save just to show off some of the other age-specific buildings. In this age here with the amphitheater, you can see that for a culture building, you will gain culture for a mountainous terrain. So it's just about looking at the adjacencies, looking at the maintenance, and trying to figure out how to best get the adjacency bonus from that building. The last type of building you should know about for now is a warehouse building, such as the stonecutter, saw pit, or brickyard here. While many buildings may end up with the age list tag, depending on a few different factors, if they're unique buildings, if they're world wonders, etc., our warehouse buildings here are always ageless. Warehouse buildings have a very unique function in Civilization 7. Unlike regular buildings, instead of gathering adjacency bonuses for tiles that surround them, they give extra yields to those rural tile improvements we talked about earlier. For instance, if we read this granary here, this granary is only going to give me +1 food, hardly worth building on its own, but it's going to add +1 food on farms, pastures, and plantations. So if you imagine I had 4 or 5 farms, pastures, and plantations, this granary would be very valuable. You'll have to read each one individually, but the stonecutter is the same thing. It gives me +3 production on its own, but +1 production on every other mine and quarry. The saw pit here is +1 production on its own, but +1 production on camps and woodcutters. These warehouse buildings can be very good in your cities, but they really shine in your towns like Chichen Itza. You'll see I have a granary in Chichen Itza, and that granary is not doing a ton for me on its own, but remember it gives +1 food to each farm, and so all of these farms that I have here in Chichen Itza are gaining +1 food because of that granary. As an example, here in this town we have this mine. It's currently giving me +2 production. This brickyard here gives +1 production to clay pits, mines, and quarries, so we would expect that if I place this brickyard down, I would gain production on this mine here and this mine over here. So let's place this brickyard down, and boom, we've gone from 2 production on those tiles to 3 production on those tiles. We've also added that 3rd production to this tile here, which could become a mine, just to let us know that if we ever build the mine on this tile, we would now be gaining 3 production. It's a pretty cool trade-off, isn't it? It's an ageless building, so once you place it down, it's never going to go anywhere. So that's an important part of the calculation, and it does depend on how many kind of rural tile improvements you have and what type those tile improvements are, but you can see pretty quickly here in this example how these warehouse buildings can be very effective in your towns and cities. It's important to note here as well that warehouse buildings, in exchange for not having any adjacency bonuses, also do not have any maintenance. So once you place them down, they don't cost you any gold or happiness or anything per turn. They simply just give you the yield specified. Now that we've gone over most of the types of buildings you will encounter in your games of Civilization 7, let's talk about how to actually put them on the map and gain their effects for your empire. The first thing to note is that placing any building on a tile will create a district. For the purpose of this video, any tile with at least 1 building on it is a district, and districts can only be connected to other districts. Your town center or your city center will always count as the first district for this expansion. You'll notice here in Batavia, if I go to put down this temple, I only have 2 options. Because it needs to be connected to a district, I can only place it on this tile here, connected to this district, or this tile here, connected to this district. I can't place it over here, or on any of these tiles, because there's no districts for it to connect to, and I can't go through the camels, because there's already something in the way, and move over in this direction. If I come to place a temple up here, you'll see this district here is giving me these 2 options. This district here is also giving me this option. This district here is giving me this option. And this district here is giving me these 2 options. So I hope this illustrates that your districts need to be connected to other districts, and you need to get your buildings from the center outwards. So if my logic follows and I place this temple right here, if I go to place the granary, for instance, I now have way more options. This new district is giving me another option over here, another option over here, and another option over here, in addition to this 1 option I already had. In Civilization 7, though, each tile can hold 2 buildings. So you'll see on this tile right here, there's only 1 building, a stonecutter. So I can take this second empty slot and use it for this temple. This will place the temple and the stonecutter on the tile together. Additionally, if I wanted to create a new district, I could leave this building alone by itself and place another building, the temple, alone by itself over here as another district. If I place the temple on the same tile as a stonecutter, so we place any 2 buildings together on the same tile, it is still a district, but it now gains the additional designation you can see on the tooltip of being known as a quarter. Throughout the game, there will be a variety of things that give bonuses to quarters. They could be policy cards, they could be kind of narrative events. In this case, if we hover over the Barreau Badour, it says the Barreau Badour here gives +2 food and happiness on quarters. So what that means is a tile with 2 buildings placed on it. Just so we're all on the same page, tiles with 1 building, a district. Tiles with 2 buildings, a district and a quarter. When you click on a building to place it, you're going to have a couple of different color-coded options. The light green one is the easiest to follow. If you are placing a building on a light green tile, it means you are creating a new district. There's currently nothing on this tile. We're not accruing anything from it. We're not replacing anything on it. It's an empty tile. We are creating a district with this building, and that'll be those light green tiles. The yellow tiles mean we are getting rid of a tile improvement that is already there. You can see if we place this building on this yellow tile, we will be getting rid of the Ming Great Wall that is already on that tile. If we come to this settlement here, though, it might be a better example. On this tile, we have already placed a woodcutter. We have done that when we had a growth event earlier. So if I place a temple on this woodcutter, it's indicating to me that I will be getting rid of the woodcutter in order to place the temple here and create the district. If I click on this, it will prompt me, create urban district. And so it tells you here, it gives you a prompt to select, okay, that I want to get rid of what's on that tile to make this new district. As you're planning out your cities, it is likely you are going to want to get rid of some of these rural tile improvements to place down buildings. Since you have to build from the center outwards, and since you want to build kind of buildings on top of other buildings with wonders in the middle to get their adjacency bonuses, it's really inconvenient to have 1, 2, 3 rural tile improvements from growth events kind of right in the middle of our city. The good news for you, though, is if we decide to build a district over top of this kind of rural tile improvement, it takes the population that was working that tile. Remember, we placed a rural population there, and it gives us that rural population back, so now we can select another rural tile improvement for it to work. Let's say we want to go work this woodcutter over here. So it's just good to know that if you overbuild on rural tile improvements, you're placing a district, you're converting them from rural to urban, you are going to get that population back, and you can recreate a brand new rural tile improvement with that population if you'd like. Placing down buildings will also expand your tile's borders the same way placing a rural tile improvement does. So if I take this tile here, there's an empty tile right here. Right, if I place a building here, it will gobble up the 3 tiles in that direction. These 2 tiles are already taken, they are accounted for, but this one is not. So if I place that building here, my settlement accrues that tile as a kind of rural tile improvement would earlier. The dark green indicator indicates that you are placing a second building on that tile to create a quarter. It can also sometimes indicate you are overbuilding on that tile. So for instance, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 tiles all here with 1 building. So we have 4 districts. Each of them can hold a second building. You can see by the big blue empty spot there. If I place this brickyard on one of these tiles, it will create a quarter, and that is what the dark green is indicating, that there is room for a second building to go here. A small number of buildings, kind of age-specific ones or warehouse ones or any other kind of building, will have requirements on what kinds of tiles it can be placed on. So not only does it need to be attached to another district following kind of our standard rules for building from the center outwards, this gristmill, for instance, specifically says it needs to be placed on a river. So if I go to build this gristmill, I go to produce it here in Bach, one of our cities, it only lets me choose a tile that's connected to another district, this quarter right here, but that's also on a river. So some buildings you have to meet additional requirements on top of the requirement to be next to another district. World Wonders may also have a specific tile they need to be placed on. For instance, the Tomb of Askia right here must be placed on a desert, but World Wonders do not have the requirement of being placed next to districts. You can see I just need the desert tile. There is no district anywhere near this desert tile, but the Tomb of Askia is still eligible. Now, if you thought this wasn't confusing enough, let me introduce you to the concept of overbuilding. We briefly touched on it earlier, but we are currently in the exploration age, and we have a lot of obsolete buildings, a lot of obsolete age-specific buildings from the Antiquity Age. They're not giving us nearly as much yields, but they are costing us full maintenance. Whatever can we do with these buildings? Well, in Civ 7, we have the option to overbuild. We can replace these age-specific buildings with new buildings for the age we are in. Let's take a look at the temple here, which is an exploration age happiness building. I still have all the same options. I can build over the yellow tiles, these rural tile improvements. I can start a new district on the kind of green tiles here. It's a good time for me to note that a world wonder will count as a district as long as it's connected to another one. So if you place the world wonder in the middle of nowhere, you can't just attach a building to it. But if your world wonder is attached to another district already, it will count as like a thoroughfare, so you can build over here. I again have my dark green option to create a quarter over here if I choose to do that. There's a district that has 1 building on it. I can add this temple to create a quarter. But you'll see I also have a dark green option on a tile that already has 2 buildings. It's because one or both of those buildings is obsolete. So if you see this option here, if we go over to the left, you can place the temple on this tile, and it says this will build over the barracks. I know it's pronounced barracks. I don't even know why I said it like that, but I digress. If I take this temple and I put it on this tile right here, and I kind of queue it up, it is going to take the barracks, get rid of it, and place the temple on that tile. As you can see, I still have the obsolete library, which I can overbuild again later, but the temple I'm placing down is giving me better yields for this new age, and I'm no longer paying the maintenance on an obsolete building. Any obsolete building can be overbuilt with any other type of building. So I can place my unique building, I can place an age-specific building, I can place a warehouse building. If I take this same temple, instead of overbuilding the barracks here, which was a military or production building, I can overbuild the bath here, which is a food building. So you do not have to overbuild type for type. Now, if you're wondering why overbuilding is important, there are a few different reasons. First, and the one we've already talked about, is maintenance. You want to get rid of any buildings that are costing you high maintenance without giving you maximum yields. Second, and more importantly, I think, though, is that the game only classifies quarters if both buildings in the quarter are not obsolete. So you could do it like this. We have a quarter here with a granary that is ageless, so it's always relevant, and an observatory which is only relevant in this age, but since they are both relevant right now, neither are obsolete. This is a quarter. You'll notice on this tooltip here, though, that it says urban instead of quarter, even though there are two buildings. That is because one or both of the buildings are obsolete. So as the age transitions, a lot of the tiles that were quarters now need to be overbuilt twice to become quarters again. They do still remain districts, though, so don't worry about that. And the final reason overbuilding is great is it gives you space for some rural tile improvements, right? Every city, regardless of what you do later, is going to have some rural tile improvements. And if you just built one building on every tile and never built any quarters and never overbuilt anything, your city would run out of room pretty quick. Overbuilding on tiles together makes adjacencies much easier. If I have a world wonder here that is giving adjacency to all of my age-specific buildings, and I load up two age-specific buildings on the same tile, it makes it much easier for both of them to get the +1 bonus from the nearby world wonder. A good example here is the Bazaar and the Inn, both age-specific exploration age buildings that are both going to gain additional yields for being next to the wonder. This is easier if I'm putting two of them on the same tile, and then two more on this tile, and then two more on this tile, instead of just one on each of these tiles forever and ever. The same thing here, science buildings get adjacency for being near resources. So this tile here would be a great spot for two science building because it's next to two resources. If I only put one science building here, I'm only getting +2 science. If I put two science buildings here, I'm getting +2 science twice. So +4 science just for using the same tile 2 times. Plus any benefits you get from it being a quarter. So just building and overbuilding two buildings on the same tile is really beneficial. Now that we've taken a look at all of the main types of buildings and the ways you can kind of configure them and build out your cities, it's finally time to circle back to cities and growth events to talk about specialists. You can see as we grow in our cities, we still have these same rural tile improvements as before. Fishing boats, woodcutters, fishing boats again, etc. I can even collect this dates if I wanted to. But I also now have these blue tiles which indicate I can use this growth event, take this citizen, and use it as a specialist. A specialist lives in a district and provides extra yields for that tile. The default calculation and the thing you'll see in common with all three tiles is that each specialist will give you 2 science and 2 culture in exchange for 2 food and 2 happiness. So you have excess food and excess happiness in your cities. This can be a good way to achieve extra science and extra culture, which can be harder to come by. This is because, as you can see, it's pretty easy to find food in the rural tile improvements, or happiness on the tile improvements as well, but it's more difficult to find science or culture on these rural tile improvements. Adding a specialist will also multiply the adjacencies of the buildings on that tile. So again, these are best used in quarters, which have 2 buildings, because it's likely they will have more adjacencies to multiply. That is where the difference comes from, with this tile giving 2 food and 1 production, this tile only giving an additional production, this tile giving an additional gold and additional production. So just remember, 2 science, 2 culture in exchange for 2 food, 2 happiness, and then you will also gain whatever adjacencies you are multiplying. By default, each district can only hold 1 specialist, but by playing through the game, you'll unlock a greater specialist limit in your cities. Anything here in education that says +1 specialment limit in all cities means you can add 2 specialists to each tile instead of 1. So you have one really good tile with lots of adjacencies you want to multiply twice. You can add another specialist to that same tile instead of only being able to do 1 per tile. There's no good way to show this because the user interface in this game is absolutely whack, but in the modern age here in the city of Wisset, you can see how this adds up. This city currently allows 5 specialists per tile, up from the 1 that I showed you because I've unlocked more specialist limit, And on some of my tiles, this one here that's gaining 35 gold per turn and 33 culture per turn and 16 science and 12 production, I have 5 of 5 specialists on this tile. So you can see, compared to other nearby tiles that have far fewer yields, by stacking a lot of specialists on the same tile, I can really multiply these adjacency bonuses and get the best effect from them. You can see this tile here that has 4 out of 5 possible specialists is also comparatively higher in terms of yields in all categories, really, compared to the tile next to it here. Any specialist you put down will survive the age transition, but it's important to remember to overbuild on those tiles. If you leave a specialist on a tile with an obsolete building, it means it can't multiply the adjacencies because the obsolete buildings lose their adjacencies over the age transition. So overbuilding on tiles where you already have specialists can be very helpful for making sure the specialists give you the most of their benefits in the new age, since you are paying the happiness and food for them anyway. The last thing I want to cover before I get to some tips and tricks are that in the modern age, there are a few different buildings. The rail station here is the most common one, which take up a full tile. If you were to try and place this rail station on a tile that has ageless buildings, it will not work. It cannot be placed through the ageless buildings. If, however, you had a tile with 2 obsolete buildings, you can build it through both obsolete buildings to create the rail station. As you can see from the tooltip, any of your full tile buildings like the rail station here do count as a quarter, even though they're only one building, because you don't have the option of placing a second building on that tile. I think I've covered everything you will need to know about city building in Civilization 7. If there's any more questions you have about city building, how it works, how the buildings work, etc., feel free to leave them in the comments below. Now let's get to some of my favorite tips and tricks. The first thing I like to do is actually this example right here. I like to make sure my ageless buildings, where possible, are together and out of the way. Most of your ageless buildings are warehouse buildings. They don't gather any adjacency bonuses, so it doesn't really matter which tile they're on in that regard. They are just giving yields to other tiles. That's not always the case. The grocer is maybe a bad example here, but by having ageless buildings together on the same tile creating a quarter, what it does is it keeps that quarter over the age transition. If I have a wonder that gives happiness to quarters, for instance, I will not have to overbuild to maintain this quarter, so I'll kind of start the next age with a little bit of bonuses. Additionally, if you have multiple tiles all with one ageless building on them, that's a lot of tiles that cannot be fully overbuilt if you want to place down, for instance, like a rail station, or you unlock more buildings later and you need the flexibility to have different adjacencies. As a good example, if you had a nice central world wonder here in the Colosseum, and you know the Colosseum gives adjacency bonuses to every single age-specific building. That means in this case, you could have up to 2, 4, 6, 8 age-specific buildings all near the Colosseum, all getting adjacency. If each of these tiles had one ageless building on it, you are now down to only 4 possible buildings that could get this adjacency. There are some exceptions to this, like unique buildings, which are both ageless and acquiring adjacencies. I'm mostly speaking about warehouse buildings in this regard, but you really want to keep your warehouse ageless buildings kind of off to the side and together on the same tile. That would be the next tip I have for you. We acquired this city in a war, so it's not perfect, but getting your world wonders down in locations where you can build buildings with adjacency bonuses next to them is really, really helpful because they give bonuses to literally everything. It makes it so much easier to get more of the yields that you want. The next thing I would say is if you have enough happiness and food in your empire, towns can really help with this. Please do not be afraid to just hoard specialists. It is one of the best ways to get insane amounts of science and culture. You'll see here in Tokyo, I have 5 specialists on this tile. I have 3 specialists on this tile. I got 1 on this tile. We saw over here I had like 5, 3, and 5 as well. As you go through the game, there are lots of options in both the unique kind of policy card options and the standard policy card options for maintaining specialists. You'll see here in the free speech card, I'm using 100% food and happiness towards maintaining specialists. So the specialists I have are far cheaper with regard to how much food and happiness they are costing me. I also have cards in that boost the specialists. This one's unique to Japan, but you'll find them all over. +1 production and science from specialists. So not only am I paying less for them, I'm gaining extra science and production for each one I have. So be on the lookout for using and abusing specialists in your games. You can see here just how many cards affect them. Food from specialists specialists in exchange for happiness in towns, culture from specialists, but plus 50% happiness maintenance. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of configure the yield specialists give you versus what you're paying for them, and I recommend doing that. When you are building out your towns, I always recommend trying to get a lot of tiles of the same type. It's not always possible, but it makes selecting a focus much easier. You can see in Con I have 1, 2, 3 different woodcutters. I also have a mine. If I take a look at this mining town, it gives extra production to woodcutters and mines. If you have a lot of the same tiles, it makes it really easy to choose a focus that works best for your town. Koba is another example where I've chosen the mining town focus because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tiles at the very minimum that are affected by that focus, which makes it really powerful. The opposite is true in Mediolanum. When it is time to select a town focus, I'm going to have 1, 2, probably 3 farms and a couple of fishing boats. If I go here to this fishing town focus, +2 food on farms, pastures, plantations, and fishing boats. I'm going to have a lot of those, so the fishing town makes sense. If I know I'm going to go fishing town here, it doesn't make sense to really build a random mine. I think what I likely want to do is build over this mine, and then take this kind of displaced population and make another farm, just so I can best utilize my specialization. This obviously doesn't apply to resources. Gathering the resources is always better than trying to maintain a different type. It would be silly to get another farm instead of accruing this gold, even though the gold is a mine. However, it's good to be paying attention to what focus you know you're going to want to choose for your town, and then choosing tile improvements that make sense for that focus when it's possible. There's no perfect recipe for this, but I've been getting a lot of questions. VanBradley, how many towns do you have compared to how many cities you have? And I typically have about 1/3 cities to 2/3 towns. Towns can be very, very powerful. Now that equation will change game to game, but do not sleep on having towns. I am doing very well in this game, and I only have like 1, 2, maybe 3 reasonably large cities. Everyone else is a town that is just doing its best to support the cities. Don't sleep on spending your gold on towns either. Again, the temple is an exception, but this sawmill right here is going to add 5 production to this town. That is 5 gold per turn because it's being translated to my empire for this sawmill, which can be really, really helpful. If I had already built a lot of camps and woodcutters, it would be even more than that. So don't sleep on spending gold in your towns either. The last tip I have for you, and it's one that I'm still working on and will be the subject of another video that focuses exclusively on towns, on what to do with them, when to turn them into cities, etc. But one of the questions I get frequently is when to choose a town specialization. When do you move it off of growing town into that specialization? Like most things in Civ, there is no perfect answer. At some point, you're just not going to be able to grow quickly enough. Like for a mining town, I would love to have this woodcutter and that woodcutter and this woodcutter and get all that production. But if I keep waiting around for those woodcutters, I'm just never sending my food anywhere, and that's not helpful. The one thing I will say, though, is you should absolutely not specialize your towns until they've grown into all of the resources they can collect. Resources are very, very powerful. So in Uxmal here, I have horses and gold and horses again and silk and dates. And you'll notice that I've went and I've grown and I've acquired all of these resources. I recommend not turning your towns into a specialized town at all until you have all of the resources within its borders. Having these resources either as an empire resource or assigned somewhere will give you way more in the long run than converting your town early to a specialization, which stops it from growing into those resources. I think that'll be it though. If you had a good time with this video, I know it was long, I know it was a lot of information, but I hope you feel a lot more comfortable building cities now in Civilization 7. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, let me know what other tutorials you would like to see down in the comments. Thank you so much everybody for watching, and I will see you in the next one.